All right, it's 6 o'clock and I think we'll start. Dan, are you going to be watching the Facebook Live for any comments
Yes, I will.
when we ask for them? Okay. All right, so Kim, I think we'll run it just like we did the last one, right? Where we'll stop at different points and ask for comments.
Sure.
And we'll have the Facebook Live or whatever. At whatever point you want, just let us know. So first, I'd like to welcome everybody for attending. This is the workshop, the mobility planning session. Oh, I forgot my video is not even on. Here we go. The mobility planning session for focusing on the area east of 140th, and we're not holding this as a formal meeting, so I'll just introduce our board members that are here. We have Tim Sayer. Tim, you want to say hi? Okay, maybe not. Jonia Martin.
Hello.
And Michael Johnson.
Hi.
Hi, Michael. All right, so then we also have Kim Delaney, who's going to be doing the mobility presentation. And we also have Joe Capra and his team.
Hello, how y'all doing?
Hi, all. We have Scarlett, who's our administrator. We have Dan Nolan, who is our IT guy. He's going to be watching the Facebook Live. And we have Rob Robinson, who's our executive assistant executive director. And then we have Liz Ricci, who's our director of parks. So I want to thank you all for attending. And how this works is for the participants, the attendees, if you have any questions or any comments, you will see on the participants list, you should see, if you find your name in there, you have an option to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, that lets me know that you would like to make a comment, and we'll be breaking at certain points and asking for public comment. So put your hand up then. Otherwise, I don't know that you want to speak. Once you've raised your hand, I'll allow you, I have to give you the privilege to speak, give you the mic, which will transfer you in as a guest. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Delaney from Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, and I'll let her talk a little bit about who she is and what they do and what we've retained her for on behalf of the district.
So, okay, well, good evening, everybody. My name is Kim Delaney. I'm with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, and thank you for the opportunity to work with you. We've been working with the district on the development of what's referred to as a mobility plan. I think many of the folks on the call are likely familiar with that, but for those who aren't, I'm going to switch over to a slideshow presentation that'll kind of walk through what a mobility plan is intended to do and the types of things that we're trying to better understand in the district so that we can develop a plan that makes the most sense for you as a community. So I am going to switch over to share my screen. And Betty, if you can give me a thumbs up, can you see my screen okay? Fantastic. So, what we're trying to assist with in the community is planning for mobility in Indian Trails. And the goal of the plan is to develop a plan that will create a safe, interconnected transportation network of complete streets. And I'll talk for a bit about how complete streets are defined. They're streets that are for all users, not just cars, but bicyclists, pedestrians, and others. And also to improve safety and mobility, access and quality of life expressly for ITID residents. And that's one of the themes that we've picked up quite a bit as we've been doing our due diligence and conducting public workshops. And this, by the way, is this is the third public workshop, and I think the 6th presentation, if we include board updates and board hearings that have taken place for the plan. And we've heard very clearly over time the emphasis that ITID, Indian Trail, is its own community. It certainly has protections in the county's comp plan with the acreage neighborhood plan. And this planning effort is designed to make sure that we have a network that takes care of ITID's residents and property owners, because those are the folks that are paying for the roads, responsible for the roads, and need to be prioritized when we're thinking about planning for roadways in your community. And so that point's been made clear, and I want to just be sure that we express that kind of as we walk into the conversation. And so this next image illustrates the boundaries that you have. They're your legislative boundaries. And so we know that Indian Trail has about 110 acres-ish or so within the total boundaries that are governed by the district. And then we have about 33.5 or so acres that are active units. And so those active units are identified in this map. This aerial has the boundary in the dashed blue and white lines. And then the active units that are bound in the kind of the neon green lines. And of course, tonight we're focusing mostly on the area that's immediately east of Westlake. So those are going to be funding units or active units 1, 3, and 14. So we've been generally referring to this area as the southeastern portion of the district, of course, because it's in the southeastern part of the active units that you have. So a couple of just overview observations. Of course, the traveling public in ITID, when we think about who are we planning for, it's not just the cars, but it's people that are on bike, people that are on foot. You also have folks that are driving golf carts out there, so that's a consideration that we have. You have sidewalks that are a little narrow. So for example, if we weren't in a pandemic and needing social distancing, it's very hard for two people to ride together on a 5-foot sidewalk. It's even harder when you're trying to keep a little space. So you have a pretty tight network with facilities that just barely provide the space that really you'd want to have if you had a properly planned transportation network that was providing all the amenities that it should. And in particular, we've noticed there are a whole lot of kids and there's a lot of school bus activity in the district. And the roadway network is so challenging to cross. There are locations where you have 3 crossing guards in one intersection. That's an unusual condition. What that tells us as planners is there's something that's breaking down in the transportation network that requires this many traffic safety officers, for example. So we want to be sure that we're really highlighting the need to make for safer, more visible crossings especially for pedestrians and cyclists, as well as equestrians, which are the other large group of users that we have kind of in the wheelhouse to make sure that we're planning appropriately. And so speaking of equestrians, of course, we know that we have riders, of course. We have riders in the district that are unique to the district as a community, both in Palm Beach County and in the region. We don't have a lot of places like that left, frankly. And so we know that maintaining a network that makes for the safest locations and crossings for equestrians and making it safe for cars as well, because that's a conflict that no one wants to create, is addressed in your mobility plan. And so as we kind of zoom out and think about the district, what we've tried to do is think about the roadway network in kind of 3 layers, if you will. So at the macro layer, we have what we call the regional vehicular network. These are the largest scale roads that are carrying long distance travelers, and they operate at higher speeds. And so those roads, and you know these roads, but I'll just talk through them for a moment. So we've got Northlake at the northern end. We've got Seminole Pratt Whitney cutting through. Royal Palm Beach Boulevard, of course, also running east-west. State Road 7 running up to its point of completion as of now, with plans for State Road 7 to continue to the north. And then Okeechobee Boulevard and Southern to the south. And that's the extent of what we would consider for you to be the regional vehicular network. Those are, the die is kind of already cast in some ways with those roads. They're designed, they are higher speed, they have wider lanes, and they're serving the purpose that they're really intended to serve. So, and then at the sub-level, we have what we're calling the local vehicular network. So these are the county roadways, okay? They're county roadways like Coconut running from Northlake to Orange, Orange running from Seminole Pratt to State Road 7, to Royal Palm Beach Boulevard, 60th Street running from the State Road 7 extension over to the end of the M Canal. And then long term, the county also has control over 190th Street and West Sycamore. Those aren't really in the horizon for any kind of immediate improvements, but there are, as the community knows, immediate improvements for the county to make, to improve and to widen these roadways that we're calling the local vehicular network. And so I just wanted to call out those roads as distinct from the balance of the district's roads, because these are roads that are actually controlled in large part by Palm Beach County. The rest of the network is the district's set of roadways. And these are blended here. The district roadways lying within the district boundaries, of course, are identified in orange. And then there are other locally controlled roads like the ones in Westlake and the ones that will ultimately be built in Indian Trail Grove. But these are what are really considered to be local neighborhood streets. And the district, of course, has two types: paved roads, which are the ones that are in the peach, and then all of the unpaved roads. And there's a whole inventory of unpaved roads that are also district roads, and they're shown very faintly in the gray lines on the map. So we're looking at the whole universe of roadways that exist in the district as part of the mobility plan. We've also done a very careful job of inventorying school bus stops and where the schools are located, as well as the parks in the district, so that we can understand what the relationship is between the transportation network and getting safely from school or from your school bus stop home again and to parks and libraries as well. So, I mentioned that I was going to blend together some of the input that we got in the community workshop back on April 30th, as well as the summary that came out of that workshop. So for the benefit of the public who's just kind of joining tonight, if you will, all of the presentations that have been provided to date are on the district's website. So there's a town hall workshop actually that started back in February, and that presentation is available, as well as the presentation that was presented in the large-scale community workshop that took place on April the 30th. That was run in this same type of format, in a Zoom format, and there's public record that was associated with it, also available through the district. And then we provided a board update last month, and that presentation is available as well. This presentation for this evening kind of blends the main ideas from those two together, kind of bring everybody up to speed if you're just, again, plugging into the conversation this evening, okay? So of the big ideas that we've been hearing about as we've been trying to understand the district, one main concern is that there's a concern from folks that we need to reduce the county road impacts on residents. And as we're considering that concern, one of the things that we've done is better understand what's called the Complete Streets Design Guidelines, which is a document that was produced by the Palm Beach MPO. Complete streets, as I mentioned, are streets that are designed to consider the needs of all users, all members of the traveling public. And when thinking about complete streets are organized so that they are always appropriate for their sense, for their context, or the context in which those roads are located. There's not a one-size-fits-all roadway type that's anticipated in Palm Beach County, and it's not anticipated in the district either. But instead, there are some roadways that are considered major corridors, some are called main connectors, and some are community connectors. And we make that distinction later on, but I wanted to just kind of provide that language to you as we begin the presentation tonight. The other thing to consider, there's an image on the left-hand side of the slide that illustrates the types of transportation users that are on the network. I apologize, I should have overwritten the word equestrians on this one. I realize it's not there. But as we think about the roadway network, the users that we want to be sure that we're accommodating are pedestrians and bicyclists expressly, because they don't have any protection around them. And equestrians are in that category as well. They're the most exposed users on the network and they need the most safety features. Public transit is another band of users that are on the network. There are no bus stops out in the district today, but there may be at some point in the future. So we want to be planning for that. Commercial vehicles, of course, essential for us to provide goods and services to function as we do today. And then personal vehicles really at the core, but also the most protected. It's not as hard to plan for cars to be safe as it is to plan for people that are on bikes, on foot, or on horseback to be safe on the roadway network. So that's a consideration. In the MPO, or Metropolitan Planning, TPA, sorry, Transportation Planning Agency's documentation on complete streets, the agency goes on to map all of the roadways in Palm Beach County and suggest what types of roadways each of them should be. And so as we zoom into the district, what we find is, I mentioned before, the regional roadways, Seminole, Pratt, Whitney, North Lake Boulevard, State Road 7, those are identified as main connectors. And so they're expected to carry a different type of traffic at a different volume and a different speed than what are called community connectors. And community connectors are roads like Coconut and Orange, Royal Palm Beach Boulevard, 60th Street, and also Persimmon is identified by the county as ultimately going to serve a role as a community connector. Now, the big distinction with that is that's not a county road, that's a district road. And so we're very aware of that distinction. Each of these roadways has been analyzed with respect to what makes sense from a design standpoint. And there's a different set of design considerations that we've identified for roads like Coconut and Orange that are very different than what's appropriate for a road like Persimmon. Okay, so there's a distinction that we're making as we better understand the district and its needs and the priority importance of protecting the roadway network for residents in the district primarily. One of the things we've heard in the workshops expressly is the desire for this roadway plan, the mobility plan, to help control cut-through traffic and speeding. And we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that this evening, especially as it relates to the southeastern portion of the district, where we're focusing our conversation tonight. What we know is there are 2 locations in the district that receive the majority of the cut-through traffic and have most of the speeding. And those locations are where we're looking tonight, which is the southeast portion of the district, immediately east of Westlake. And we know that's a condition that's likely to increase as Westlake continues to develop. There's going to be more destinations and there are going to be more residents in here. So there's going to be more folks that are traveling back and forth through this part of the district, getting over to Royal Palm Beach Boulevard and over to State Road 7. The other area in the district that was identified is that portion which is we refer to as the northern portion of the district, and that's for the most part all that area that lives between 60th Street and North Lake and all the cut-through traffic that's taking place in between our neighborhoods as areas around this portion of the district continue to infill. So these are focal areas that have been highlighted in the workshop process. It's one of the reasons we're having a workshop tonight to focus just expressly on this area that's east of Westlake, because it seems to have kind of a shorter fuse on the need to have improvements put in place, given the pace of development in the Westlake community. Pardon me. The concerns that have been raised with respect to those roads are things like widening, speeding, congestion, and appearance. And these are 4 separate considerations that we're going to touch on as we carry forward. But the summary from the workshop we had back in April highlighted those as the primary considerations to keep in mind as we're developing the mobility plan. So the types of roadway configurations that might make sense if those are the concerns the residents have. On a road like Coconut, for example, instead of allowing a road like that to be built without any buffers, there may be a preference from residents for roadways like Coconut, which again are just the county roadways, where the county has already concluded that it will construct a 5-lane corridor. Well, one of the ways to help reduce the impact of that road on residents is maybe to allow that road to be just a little bit wider so that the county can install landscape swales like the ones that are illustrated on this page, center medians with landscaping as well, and a combination of sidewalks and shared use paths so that the road can have safer spaces for all the different users on the network, not just the vehicles that we know are going to need to accommodate it on that road. It's going to be a 5-lane section where the county has identified it and taken control, but perhaps a slightly wider cross section with amenities like these would reduce the impact on county residents. For roads like, for example, 60th Street, if 60th Street becomes a major corridor within the district, perhaps even a larger section might be appropriate, and that'll be up to the community to decide. But if so, perhaps a 5-lane section could be developed with even wider bioswales, help control and clean some of the stormwater, which is a primary responsibility for the district, and at the same time allow wider shared use paths so we can accommodate all users on a wider roadway section, like, for example, a 60th Street or a State Road 7. This is a wider cross section that might apply to one of those 2 types of conditions. One of the things we know about transportation patterns in the district is there's a long-standing history of crashes with a number of hot spots that are already documented in the data that the district is using as it's conducting its regular transportation planning, and we're using it for the mobility plan. This map illustrates the locations that tend to be along major county roadways where we have higher than proportionate number of crashes taking place along, for example, Seminole Pratt Whitney and intersections with major roadways, along Royal Palm Beach Boulevard and its intersection along major district roadways, along Orange, along North Lake, and then distributed throughout the district. So we're very aware of the crash history, and we're using that to inform the types of recommended improvements in the mobility plan. Why that's important is that we know the faster a vehicle is moving, the less likely a pedestrian or a cyclist is going to survive a crash. And so if vehicles are moving at 20 miles an hour, about 90% of pedestrians still survive those accidents. But as the rate of travel increases, by the time you get to 40 miles an hour, only a 10% chance that a pedestrian or a cyclist is going to get out of that accident alive, out of that crash alive. So I know that controlling speed is a paramount concern when we're looking to create the safest transportation network we can. Why that happens is because the field of vision narrows as the rate of speed increases. And so this slide illustrates that field of vision. So at the bottom right-hand side, at 20 miles an hour, for example, a driver can see folks that are on the sidewalk or folks that are coming through a crosswalk, and they have the ability to anticipate them and slow down. But as the rate of travel, as the rate of speed increases, the field of vision for drivers gets smaller. So by the time a car is going 40 miles an hour, what you see on the top left-hand side of the images, a driver can really only see kind of down the road at a much further distance, and they never see the pedestrian or the cyclist that's coming in from a side street or from a crosswalk. And so that's why those accidents tend to occur more frequently, and unfortunately they occur with greater impact. And so with that in mind, of the things we're trying to get input on, and this is one of the things that we want to hear from you about this evening, is what type of pedestrian and bicycling network do you think is appropriate in the district? What you have now, for the most part, are 5-foot asphalt sidewalks on one side. But what the standard planning practice would suggest is to maintain a safer network in kind of a rural condition, that ideally you'd have a series of paths that are wider. They become shared use paths that are at least 8 feet wide, and in some cases 10 feet wide, maybe 12 feet at some point, but at a minimum 8 to 10 feet, an 8-foot minimum dimension is necessary to really safely accommodate cyclists together, because 2 people can ride and cross and pass each other. It's also wide enough to safely and legally accommodate both pedestrians and cyclists in the same space. What we know is that most folks don't really want to use bike lanes if they're not protected, and we don't tend to have those in the district. So as we're planning going forward, one of the ideas to get input on is whether or not you as residents feel it's better to separate cyclists and pedestrians from the roadway altogether and put them over in shared use paths that are on the shoulders of the roadway network rather than immediately adjacent to them. That's a point we can come back to, but I wanted to call out that distinction. The types of improvements that can be made to further improve safety for cyclists and pedestrians are things like raised crosswalks and speed tables, which are illustrated on the left-hand side of the slide, and even lighted crosswalks that are illustrated on the right. What we're starting to find is that there's different locations where speed tables are appropriate with what are called textured crosswalks, but perhaps near schools, it might be more appropriate to go ahead and light those crosswalks so that if there's kids or parents that are in the crosswalk is lit, and those individuals are illuminated, you don't have to light the whole street. But if you light the crosswalk, you make for a radically safer condition. That's one of the types of improvements that we think you might find appropriate. We found a number of locations where we want to recommend them to the community to consider. And these are the types of infrastructure improvements that would be the things that we'd look for your feedback for this evening. The other consideration, I'm sorry, I just jumped past the slide. The other consideration is that what we know, and I mentioned earlier, most cyclists really don't want to be in a bike lane. When you look at the survey data about cyclists across the country, what you find is really only about 1% of cyclists are what are called strong and fearless. I'm not one of those, just FYI. Strong and fearless cyclists will only want to ride in a bike lane. They like the visibility, they like having less interference from potential impacts coming to them from the sidewalk, and they would rather be out in a bike lane where they believe they're the most visible for drivers. Of course, they're also the most exposed for drivers. The next category of cyclists are considered to be enthused and confident. So the enthusiastic and confident cyclists will not ride in a bike lane unless it's protected. Either there's a curbed buffer or there's some type of physical intervention between the cars and the cyclist, but not an exposed bike lane. The majority of cyclists are in a category that's been described as interested but concerned. They like the idea of biking, but they only want to be out in the roadway network if they're completely separated from vehicles. That's the vast majority of cyclists. And that means that we need to grade separate where the cyclists go and where the cars go to make appropriate facilities. So that means a wider shared use path can accommodate that instead of a bike lane on the edge of the road. A third of the total population, by the way, is in what's called no way, no how. You know, certainly my mom is in that category and lots of folks that I know. So it's not that everyone's going to bike, but if they are, we want to be sure that we're creating a mobility network that addresses the safest and most accommodating mobility system that we can. So that said, as we're looking at bicycle paths in the mobility plan, the other thing we heard in the workshops so far is people would really prefer for those bicycle facilities to be separated from the roadways. And so the images on this slide illustrate different ways that we can accommodate cyclists in what are called shared use paths or off-road multimodal paths. They can be standalone or they can run adjacent to a roadway, but separated from with a landscape buffer. So I just am offering that up for discussion as we go. The other main point of discussion in the workshops and sentiment from the public was the need to add more traffic calming. And traffic calming is an important solution, but an intervention that we want to be sure that we really know where we're installing traffic calming and what happens as a result. One of the things that we know as planners and engineers is that when you calm down one road, well, the cars usually go around it and they go down the adjacent road. And so as we're considering traffic calming, we do want to get input from you, not only as to the types of traffic calming features that you like, but also be sure that we understand where people are tending to speed and where we have conflicts, so that as we start to identify locations for traffic calming, we're also anticipating where those drivers are going to be diverted to, so that we appropriately treat the entire transportation network and not just the one place that's the easiest for drivers to get through today. So there's a variety of traffic calming interventions, and I'm going to talk through those just for a moment so we can be sure that we all have common language as we're talking through the workshop. Before I do that, why don't I take a pause, Betty, because I'll get into kind of the second part of the presentation and ask if that overview makes some sense, if there's any questions, if there's anything I said that doesn't seem accurate or needs more information before I get into kind of the details. Okay?
The only thing I caught was we're 100 square miles, not acres, and 30, yeah. So
yes,
that's it.
Thank you for that.
Do we have any questions from anyone attending? You can just put your hand up under participants, find your name, and you should be able to raise your hand there, or in the bottom left of your screen, depending on how you joined us. And if you want to say anything, you have any questions, please feel free. I see that we have Tim Sayers' hand up. Go ahead, Tim.
Kim, this is kind of a question on it. We let's say 50,000 residents in our area. that's what I think we'll have after the census is done.
Yep.
Is there an average number of lanes on east and west that you need to handle all of that traffic? Would there be like a number of lanes? How many would it be? Would it be,
So it's
you
a
understand what I'm asking?
I understand entirely the question, I think. And what I'd suggest to you is, the answer to that isn't exclusive to just the residents that you have. It's the mix of uses that exist in the district.
Right.
It's a different challenge. So, and as we're diving into the composition of the district, we're becoming more aware of the traffic flows that are occurring because you really are mostly a single land use type. And so because you're a mostly residential district, it means that there are limited trip capture opportunities and there are longer what are called trip lengths. You have one Publix, right, in the center on Seminole Pratt and a limited amount of retail, but that doesn't satisfy the needs of most residents. There are very few workplace opportunities. And so folks that are working aren't tending to work likely in the district. They may be telecommuting today, but as we're in our regular transportation pattern and the one that we'll have, post-pandemic, you would imagine there'd be lots of folks driving to go to work and then driving to come home, driving to get goods and services because it's a very limited inventory that you have in the district, and then driving back again. And so it's an excellent question that you're asking, but it actually has a very complex answer. It's not just the volume of people, it's the mix of uses that you have in a particular area that generates the transportation load on the network. So there are different ways to solve that. One way to solve that is to widen roadways so that you can ignore the land use side of the equation and presume everybody's going to drive for every trip, and enlarge the roadway network to carry peak loads at the fastest rate possible. That's kind of an extreme answer, but I'm using it just for point of illustration. Another avenue is to consider land use composition and at least have the conversation as a community as to whether or not it might be appropriate for some locations to provide those destinations that people are driving out and back for every day. We tend to find that's very effective in communities, and many communities are shifting to that mode that began as exclusively residential. They started dealing with traffic problems and realized, gosh, we can't build enough lanes to get out of this. And so they have reconsidered the land use patterns within their communities, which produces a net balance in transportation trips on the roadway network. Trips tend to be shorter, or they don't happen. They don't get exported onto the larger network because those destinations are nearer to home. So that's a complex question. I don't want to not give it the full attention that it deserves. It's a very complex set of answers that comes along with that, but that's how we would consider it. There's not a rule of thumb with people versus lanes. The relationship is trip generation versus roadway capacity. And trip generation is a function of people living there, plus people working there, plus people shopping there, plus people going to school, to church or religious and cultural destinations, to parks and recreational areas, the hours those activities tend to occur. And then if you do your best job with the land use mix, you actually get the best relationship with the transportation network. And I don't know that we know what the best job is yet on the land use mix for the district. That's something we're still trying to understand. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Tim, I just have a clarifying question. Were you asking for what we would need for just our residents, not including the surrounding traffic?
No, I was asking total number of lanes needed to service our area in and out, anything that's going to happen at Westlake, because that's going to go through our area, anything that's going to happen at GL Homes, and with the commercial being built out. So she answered the question, in my opinion, very well. So
I'm just trying to understand if you're including all of theirs as well, because it's different if we're looking at only ours. So
yeah, No, yeah, including everything that would flow through our area or anything like that. So
Right.
All right.
thank you, Kim.
I saw that there was somebody had their hand up. Mark Young. Hold on one sec. I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. My question is, does the Indian Trail Improvement District plan on allowing golf carts on these bike paths? And the reason my concern is, recently my girlfriend was out walking a dog and on a sidewalk, and it was at night. She didn't have a flashlight, just walking the dog, and she was almost hit by a golf cart operated by some kids, probably in their early teens. And so I was kind of curious on what the plans were on either allowing or restricting golf carts or other semi-motorized vehicles.
So to answer that question, currently under the county's, because we're under the county as far as that goes, this is a police power issue, and we are not allowed to have golf carts on the sidewalks. Now, if you have a road permitted, it has to be plated, licensed, insured golf cart, you're allowed to have it on roads. I believe it's less than 30 miles an hour, but you're not allowed to go on roads that are higher than that. I could be wrong. Joe, is that correct? Is it 30 miles an hour?
Not sure what that number is. We're not sure. Yeah.
You're not sure? Okay, I'm pretty sure it's like 30 miles an hour. So they should not be on the sidewalks.
Okay, I mean, these are just teenagers, younger teenagers. I was just kind of making sure that was kind of plans to keeping them off of there as well.
Well, in terms of multi-use pathways, they'd be wider, and that would be something that we would have to address. Right now it's not allowed, period. So
sounds good to me.
All right, thanks.
So, okay.
All right.
Want me to go ahead and keep rolling?
Yeah, unless there's any other questions from anyone. I don't see any other hands, so we'll move along.
Super. Okay, so the next set of slides covers a variety of traffic calming and traffic control measures that the district has actually a pretty good experience in testing different interventions, and some of them seem to be more popular than others. And so what we want to do is kind of unpack the toolbox, if you will, of different types of traffic calming interventions. And then we have some suggestions about ways you might want to think about packaging them up to do our best job of encouraging people to behave the way we want them to in terms of driving down through your roadway network in particular, as well as accommodating other users. So traffic calming is really looking at safety and driver behavior. And so of course we know stop signs are a default for 2, 3, or 4 way stops, and the district has been working on locations to install additional stop signs. But traffic calming can be a bit more creative, if you will. The types of features that we see in communities, your speed signage is pretty effective, where you have speed traffic signs that let you know if you're going the right speed, you can get a smiley face, and if you're going too fast, the sign starts blinking, or it tells you you're going too fast, or simply communicates to you what your speed is. Raised intersections are a technique where the district already has some experience with speed tables, and so a raised intersection kind of applies that idea to the whole intersection. And so, so as you come through the intersection, you know how you feel the desire to slow down. Anyway, when you go over a speed table, well, going through a raised intersection accomplishes something similar. These are always installed with advanced warning signage to let folks know they're approaching a raised intersection, and also rumble strips, which let drivers know also, hey, pay attention, you're coming to a different type of condition in the roadway, so behave appropriately. Speed bumps, again, speed bumps and speed tables are just the smaller version of raised intersections, and we already know that There's not a lot of desire for speed bumps, which are kind of abrupt traffic calming measures, but speed tables tend to be more popular. They tend to be more popular in most communities, and especially if you have a heavier vehicle or if you're pulling a trailer on the back, because it's a little easier on the vehicle and the driver when you go over a speed table. But there are a number of locations where speed tables seem to be working effectively, and more locations that, that we might want to consider applying them. Bulb outs are another feature where you actually extend the curb out into the roadway network to essentially choke down the space where you travel through an intersection. So what you can see best, and this is a very urban example, I have one that's been designed just for the acreage a few slides later. But what this does a nice job of illustrating is what the function and style of a bulb out does to the roadway network. So instead of allowing kind of a wide lane to continue through an intersection, what a bulb out does is narrow the field of view for drivers. It also makes for a shorter crossing distance for pedestrians. So we get kind of a lot of benefits out of interventions like bulb outs. You can landscape them in addition, so you get a beautification improvement. You get a pedestrian safety improvement because you shorten the distance the pedestrian has to cross, and you get a traffic calming benefit because you narrow the throat of the roadway where cars are driving through, and that the driver behavior in that condition is always to slow down because you don't have as much space to hustle through the intersection. So bulb outs are a feature that that we think might have some good applicability. We'd like to get your feedback on that as we're testing different options. Chicanes are another feature that are similar to bulb outs, but they tend to be kind of mid-block. They're in between intersections. And what chicanes do is add curbing and landscaping into the roadway to force vehicles to drive around the chicane, and by causing those cars to deflect, drivers then slow down. So chicanes are a mid-block version, essentially, of what bulb outs provide at intersections. So that's another feature that we find good success with. Center islands, or what are called splitter islands, are a feature that the district already has. There are lots of locations where splitter islands make a lot of sense. Not only do they add that diversion to slow drivers down, but you can also landscape them, which is a nice feature. So you can add some beautification, you can start to create a canopy tree effect, and you can divert vehicles from just having kind of a straight shot to speed through a roadway, and instead force them to slow down instead of ask them with speed limit signage. You kind of force drivers to slow down as you start to create physical interventions in the roadway network. Crosswalks can be provided in a number of different ways. Of course, most of the crosswalks today in the district are just simply painted crosswalks, and painted crosswalks, don't really do a whole lot. They comply with federal standards for pedestrian safety and ADA because they usually include ramps, although we know we have to address continuing ADA compliance, or Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, as we design the mobility plan for the district. But crosswalks, again, in their meekest form, are these painted crosswalks that are at grade, and they essentially kind of disappear over time. Instead, you can always color crosswalks. Like, for example, the image on the right-hand side of the slide uses what is a stamped asphalt that is a colored asphalt to at least help that crosswalk become more visible. Crosswalks can also be textured. And so, for example, in the bottom left-hand side, this crosswalk is both colored and textured, so you can feel it differently in the road than you're driving down the typical travel lane. And then in addition, crosswalks can be delivered in a couple of other forms. Crosswalks can also be integrated into a speed table so that you can create a raised crosswalk. You get a double benefit for that. The pedestrian is more visible because they're up a little higher than the rest of the vehicles, and the crosswalk itself then provides a speed table function to get drivers to slow down. So raised crosswalks are a fourth version, and a fifth one are lighted crosswalks. And again, I had mentioned earlier, one of the things that may be a very desirable improvement in the district is the idea of lighted crosswalks, particularly near schools and maybe parks as well. There seems to be a desire to avoid street lighting in the district because it has a really great dark canopy and there's not a lot of light pollution in the district, but instead just to create lighting where we need it. Again, lighted crosswalks might be a very desirable intervention to keep the cost low with respect to lighting and focus that lighting where we need it. So those are 5 different ways to think about crosswalks. And we have a number of locations where we'd like to propose different types of these crosswalks throughout the district, again, near schools, near parks, and then intersections that seem to have a stronger need for traffic calming. As we package those types of interventions together, again, I mentioned we have some diagrams to illustrate what these packages of interventions might look like. So this is actually using an aerial from the district and then superimposing the building footprints, the house footprints. This actually is an intersection that happens to be east of Westlake on the roadway network where we're talking about tonight. So if we wanted to package together some improvements and start to be more aggressive with traffic calming, a feature like this, which is a series of splitter islands as we approach an intersection, is really a pretty comprehensive way to slow the traffic approaching the intersection in all 4 directions. What you can notice is these green edges are those bulb outs, which then create for a shorter distance for crosswalks for pedestrians crossing the intersection. This type of packaged improvement might be the type of thing that residents in the district might think is appropriate. It physically slows the traffic and adds beautification at the same time, while we still maintain all of the traffic flows. We still have the same number of lanes. We're just arranging those lanes geometrically in a different pattern. Another image of what that kind of package of improvements could look like. This intersection could be raised or could be at grade. And again, the splitter islands would be slowing traffic as it approaches. The intersection itself could be raised as well. And again, we're narrowing the crossing for pedestrians so that they are safer and able to get out of the flow of cars more quickly. Kind of a view of what it looks like if you approach from the street as well. So if you can imagine, as you come towards the intersection, you already can see you have to make a diversion as you get there, and you divert again on the other side. So this is a very effective measure. It is always a function of you get what you pay for. So if traffic calming is of paramount importance, then the types of features like this one really get a significant return on that investment to physically slow the vehicles as well as add some beautification. In addition, just more additional views of the same type of feature. So zooming in just a little closer, what you can see again is the narrower crosswalk for pedestrians. And what this slide also illustrates is maintaining what we would call a shared use path on one side of the road that would not be just 5 feet, but this is actually an 8-foot shared use path extending along the side of the road to accommodate both pedestrians and cyclists in the same space. You don't need 2 sidewalks, that each of which is only 5 feet, if you can provide one that's 8 feet. That's wide enough for both types of users. Pardon me. In terms of roadway cross sections, the district has a mix of roadways that tend to be either about 60 feet of right-of-way or 80 feet of right-of-way. So we've been trying to understand what combination might make sense to create kind of a good typical standard for those roads that you would want to improve for non-motorized users, for multimodal users, equestrians, cyclists, and pedestrians. And so this image illustrates what might make sense for a 60-foot width. We would call this a rural neighborhood street. And in this type of cross section, your roads already tend to have 12-foot travel lanes with 5-foot soft shoulders. And so what might be appropriate is to add landscape swales on either side and add shade trees to create a tree canopy along the roadway, split rail fencing to separate where the vehicles are going to be from where the non-vehicles are, right? And then in a tighter right-of-way, maybe a 10-foot flexible surface shared use path that could be used by both pedestrians, cyclists, as well as equestrians. We don't really have enough room on the 60-foot roadways to accommodate equestrians safely on both sides. Really, the equestrian traffic needs to be on just one side. And so with a slightly wider shared use path, we're able to accommodate a transportation facility that meets the needs of all users legally and safely. So where you have slightly wider roadways, you do have a series of 80-foot roadways as well. So in the 80-foot right-of-way, we have more real estate to work with. In these locations, what you might want to consider is not just a landscape swale, but actually a bioswale, at least on one side. Bioswales, to be effective, need to be at least 14 feet in width to really function as what is defined as a bioswale. That makes for a wide enough area at the base of the bioswale to allow for the percolation necessary and water storage and conveyance to let them function truly as bioswales. And so in this illustration, what might be appropriate in the 80-foot right-of-way is something like this. We would also call this a rural neighborhood street. This one's actually an equestrian neighborhood street. We have enough room for an unpaved equestrian trail to be maintained on one side, a landscape buffer, and perhaps a split rail fence to, again, create visual separation for the equestrian users on the roadway network and the vehicles. On the other side of the street, again, adding a split rail fence to create the symmetry that comes from having a well-designed roadway cross-section, enough space to create a bioswale. And then if we already can accommodate the equestrians in one location, the shared use path can only be 8 feet. It doesn't have to be 10 to accommodate the equestrians as well. So this is the type of cross-section that we think might be appropriate in the district as you upgrade your roads over time. One thing to mention with respect to traffic calming and street enclosure is the role of landscaping. This happens to be a neighborhood street in West Palm Beach. Again, it's in an urban example, but it's one that was close by. This is Banyan Street in West Palm. The one side of the street doesn't have consistent landscaping. So this is a 60-foot right-of-way, it happens to be. It's a 2-lane road, happens to have on-street parking and sidewalks. If you turn around and look in the other direction, this is the same roadway. The only real meaningful difference is there's tree plantings that's taken place over time. And so in that same dimension, the role of landscaping is really significant, where you have regularly spaced shade trees that are planted. You go from a condition that really doesn't tell drivers to slow down to one that communicates a very different message. So we would suggest in the district, as part of the mobility plan, the role of shade trees through the district, regularly spaced along the shoulders of roadways that are prioritized, would be a very valuable investment. It's the type of investment you want to start early because it takes some time for the trees to mature. But once the tree canopy becomes established, not only do you get traffic calming because drivers don't speed down roadways that are canopy roads, that's the evidence for driver behavior, but you also get shade for the network, which helps reduce the heat sink that's out there. And most people would say it's a much prettier section when you have a series of shade trees planted versus not. The other thing to consider, as you saw in the earlier diagram, is the use of split rail fencing. Of the sentiments that we heard in the workshops so far is a desire to keep the rural look and feel of the acreage just as it is, rural and equestrian and soft in its appearance, not hardened in its appearance. And so one of the ways we can do that, in addition to canopy trees, is also by considering an appropriate fencing type along particularly the equestrian trails. And I'll get to the maps that illustrate those trails in a moment. And so picking a consistent split rail fencing type, maybe a particular tree species, will allow the district over time to make improvements that enhance the rural character and equestrian character, don't detract from it, but also make for better defined spaces for drivers and non-motorized users, so we get a safer condition and a more attractive one as well. Again, beautification with tree plantings is a key component of a well-organized mobility plan. And so we're working through a series of tree planting species and locations for consideration as you implement the mobility plan over time. And again, canopy trees in particular is a tree species that we'd be focused on in the district. We've gotten a lot of feedback that folks don't really want to see a lot of palm trees in the district. So we've shied away from that. Let us know if that information was wrong. But we would think as planners, a canopy tree effect is the more appropriate one given the architecture and the type of community that you've worked so hard to establish and maintain.
Kim?
Yes.
I just have one quick question. Go back to that last slide. So those trees and based on the setbacks that you show on your drawings, are we able to, like those setbacks, they don't look like they're as set back as the ones that are in your drawings. Is that because they were before, stringent rules or what have you?
Yeah, so
are we able to get that effect?
So that's a great question that you asked. Let me go back to one of our prior drawings. So what we know, if you have a soft shoulder, we need to have tree trunks that provide at least 6 feet of clearance from the road. Okay, if we have a curved section, like on the county road diagrams, we only need 4 feet of setback for the tree. But in soft shoulders, this is like, let's say this is, Orange or Persimmon or one of your smaller roadways, a district road. We know we're going to maintain a soft shoulder. We have the ability to use fencing. Realize those images with the trees didn't have any fencing to help narrow the view, right, and define the corridor. What we would suggest based on the feedback we've gotten is that we know, particularly where you have equestrian trail streets, that there can be sometimes dangerous conditions that are presented because people kind of honk and wave to the horses and the horses say, why are you honking? And then you can have a point of interference. So having a consistent fence line, we would suggest as designers, create the visual edge that not only is aesthetically an improvement, but also a safety enhancement. It also keeps drivers out of the swale. And we want to really protect the swales from any kind of cars going into the swale because they don't function in the same way. So in the prototype that we're starting to test for the district, we're beginning to believe that we would want to suggest consistent split rail fencing of a particular type set at 6 feet back. Notice there's a 6 foot setback from the edge of the travel lane, and that maintains the clear zone. The trees can actually be planted much closer, and we're still testing to understand where we might want the trees to be planted. To be the most conservative, what we've suggested is locate the trees on the outside edge because the tree then provides the most shade for the shared use path. That's why the tree is located on the outside edge of the bioswale, because we want to shade the path. And we've tended to think the tree would be we would want to have that tree closest to the equestrian trail as well. So you get a little shade when you're on the equestrian trail. That's a design decision. We otherwise can locate the trees closer to the road and get more of a canopy faster, but then we sacrifice the benefit of shade for those other users. So we actually have had a lengthy debate about the placement of these trees on our team. So I'd be curious to hear your feedback. That's the in tree planting.
I'm wondering if you can zigzag it so that you have like every other one close to the sidewalk, every other one closest to the road, maybe, so that you still get, because I really love, and I'm sure other people are going to agree with me, but the picture where you have the canopy over the road, that's a really beautiful, something that I would love for us to get to in some of our roads. I think that's a natural, people will naturally slow down with that. Right. And I think our residents, it adds value for properties and just a, overall enjoyment part. So I maybe our community members that are here can chime in on those kinds of things. Because I think that's an important point,
Right. And that's very helpful feedback, Betty, and kind of a neat idea. So what we'll do is we'll test a couple sections to look at zigzagging and how those canopies might be established that way. That might be a great solution to getting both types of benefits from the tree canopies. So enough shade so the sidewalk gets a little bit shady, but also enough canopy near the road so that we start to more quickly establish this type of appearance. So we're being modest in our budgeting, and as we're developing cost estimates for the board's consideration, we're considering recommending a slightly smaller tree on installation, like a 14-foot tree. You can also always expedite that if the board or residents want to partner with the district for larger trees on installation. So that's
Right.
another option that you have, and we'll be recommending that as one of your implementation strategies, considering that with residents.
Joni, you have your hand up?
Hi, thank you. I love the trees also. I know most of our residents get upset when they see all the trees being cut down, so it would be a great way to get trees back into our neighborhood. And definitely I agree, less palms. It doesn't seem to be a natural tree out here at all. I'm curious as to what type of trees would actually make that canopy. Is it an oak tree?
Well, so we have been working with some landscape architects to inform that. So we have buttonwood trees as an option. We have oak trees as an option. I think maples are an option, but not cypress, because cypress would drop its leaves and be bare in the winter. So I think we're tending towards those first three types: oak, buttonwood, and maple. That would maintain their leaf coverage through the year, give you a canopy, and be able to survive. Particularly, those trees are selected because we know we want to have swales and even bioswales. So all of those tree types are expressly chosen because they can do well in a constant wet environment. So as we think about maybe varying, to Betty's initial point, we may have locations where we could vary the trees, where some must be a tree species that can maintain the wet condition, but others maybe get out to the edge and can be trees that can survive, trees that we don't have to think about that mostly wet condition. So we have some variation in design we can think about based on tree placement. But to that earlier question, Jenny, those are the tree species: buttonwood, oak, and maple are the three that we've found, based on our research so far, would do the best, particularly in a bioswale. We want to be sure that we're keeping a tree type that's at least got some consistency for you, because we expect you may want bioswales on all the county roads, ultimately either in the median or maybe on the shoulders. So we're trying to create some consistency in the recommendations to you as well.
All right, before we move on, does anyone else, any of the guests, the residents, have any questions or want to provide some comments on the trees? What do you think about the trees, the fence, the bioswales?
Excuse me, Betty, there's a Q&A. Somebody's got a question in there.
Okay, sorry, I missed that. Okay, so Mark Young is asking, what are the costs versus benefit of these different options? For instance, annual pruning of tree canopies could be significant to keep power lines clear. Good question.
So did you want me to try to address that?
Yes, please.
Sure. So as part of the plan, it's a good general question, actually, if I can answer it in a general context. So as part of the mobility plan, we're developing for you a catalog of different recommended improvements. And each of those improvements will have a cost estimate, both for installation as well as maintenance. And so we'll be presenting that, Mark, to the board and the community as part of the mobility plan. So one of the chapters will have a catalog of these different types of interventions, what they look like, how much area they take up, where would we recommend they be installed, and what the costs are for both installation and maintenance. And then in addition to that, we'll be mapping out all the locations that we think are the appropriate locations for these types of interventions for you to react to as a community. So there's always going to be a trade-off between what you want to install and then what you want to maintain. And so that's going to be ultimately a board decision influenced by community input. You can have some cost sharing. I mean, there can be locations where communities can say, we're willing to put this in, but residents, you need to maintain them. That's an option that you have as a community. Or if you want to have the consistency, the board can take it on as its responsibility. So there's different ways to go about that. But we'll have those all recommended for the board's consideration as part of the planning work. Joe, did you want to add anything to that maintenance question? Because I see you're there.
Yes, can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, let me, Mike, I'd like to just answer the question about the golf carts, just so we're clear on those. Basically, golf carts can only operate on streets maximum 30 miles per hour, as Betty mentioned, or under, okay? The maximum speed of a golf cart right now in the state of Florida, so you know, is supposed to be under 20 miles per hour. So you have a feel for that. And you can cross a road, a road of 45 miles per hour or less, okay? So for example, we have county roads like let's say Royal Palm Beach Boulevard or Coconut, which are 45 mile per hour. You could cross those roads, of course, with a golf cart. However, and we're talking about riding on the road. So I just want to make sure you understand the difference between, we haven't just designated a golf cart path at this time. And so just want to make sure you understood those speeds, and Betty was correct on that. And of course, the golf carts have to have headlights, brake lights, turn signals, and windshields, and so forth. So, and you're only supposed to be operating those golf carts if you're over 14 years of age. So just to give you an idea of that. So now let me go to the maintenance aspect of this. If you know, most of the maintenance, most of it, and I want to make sure everybody realizes, we created this section recognizing where your road is today, okay? And we recognize that some roads may be a little different. They may be off by a few feet here and there. But we're trying to make sure we understand the intent of having a road. And then we have to have a clear zone where we put the split rail fence as shown on the screen here. And then we've tried to make sure whether you decide to landscape it with just a swale or whether you decide to landscape it with a bioswale, you want certain widths there. And the 14 would be a minimum that you'd want on the bioswale. Typically the plants, we've tried to move away from the power lines, overhead power lines. And that's why, for example, you have 8-foot sidewalk, asphalt sidewalk or multi-use path. And then you have also the unpaved equestrian trail. So usually the power lines are on the outside. Now, there are boxes at certain intersections, you know, the AT&T, the FP&L boxes that are rather large. There are some of those that we may need to have some adjustment to. And some of them, we will probably work around, but we try to do that first on just about every utility. So the idea is to try to keep the trees away from those overhead utilities. Where the underground ones are, that is sometimes a challenge. We've been able to work around them. But for example, that tree that you see on this drawing here, we've put it in, if we're going to put it in the bottom of a swale, we would provide a tree. And the buttonwood is one that can have wet feet. We probably would use that type of tree there, and we put it close to the bottom of the swell if we determine that we had some utilities in conflict with that type of tree. So there's I guess you want to say there's some wiggle room in these sections. I don't want you to think that every one of these is exactly the way to be set up, because we're going to, obviously we don't want to have to repave all the roads to do this improvement. We would hopefully, for example, if we're going to have an existing asphalt a sidewalk out there now that may be 5-6 feet wide, we can widen what's out there and then maybe do a final cover on it so it looks like one path. So that's generally what we're trying to talk about here. Is this is the components we think that would be nice in these rights of way, and you then have to decide how often, how many trees you want. Staggering the trees is a great idea. The split rail fence, we just want to make sure it's at least 6 feet off the paved roadway. That's a typical clear zone requirement for the general speed limits we have out there. Most of your speed limits vary. You have your ITID roads typically are 30 miles per hour. We do have some that are 40, and we do have one, I think that's 45, which is 1/40th, for example. But then a lot of them are 30. So that kind of, that's good, of course. The slower the speed limit, then we can kind of work with some of the components that we're talking about in a little narrower area. Obviously, by putting these components out there, whether they're a split rail fence or a tree or swales or so forth, that and the fact that there are pedestrians on these sidewalks and horses, and so it will slow down the traffic. That generally happens. People see more people out there. They tend to try to drive a little slower. I'm not going to say they always drive slower. I'm just telling they tend to drive slower. So I hope I answered your question.
I have two other questions. I'm going to ask the second one first, actually, because it's about the trees, and then we'll get to Krista's question. So Dixie is asking, couldn't a nice tree like an oak tree cover both sides, a road canopy and a sidewalk path canopy, especially if trimmed, shaped accordingly? I would hate to see them trimmed back by Asplund. They are savage about cutting them back.
Yeah. And so to address that, so we're, now that we feel as though we have what seems to make sense from a cross-section standpoint, as illustrated in this diagram, again, as Joe mentioned, what we've tried to do is package up what would be kind of like a typical condition. We are taking the next step, and we'd be open to suggestions from your residents who know your community well about what are the species that tend to do the best in your soils. We'll also be reaching out to landscape architects, but it's nice to get that feedback from the community. You know, thus far, oaks, maples, and buttonwood trees have been the types that have been recommended specifically, as Joe mentioned, because they can have wet feet. And so, so we want to make sure that we're being mindful of that. But trees that have the best canopy are what we want to try to specify, so that you can get this look. You know, as we think about the district, and you drive it every day. I've only had the luxury of being out in the district about 12 times, you know, in this past few months working on the plan. The idea of a canopy road just seems like a natural fit to the look and feel of the district, and because we got other benefits out of it. So, so long answer to a short question. Yes, oaks are one of the things that we're considering, but we are also open to suggestions for other species that residents might like to see other than oaks, maple, and buttonwood as the other typical species that can survive the bioswale condition. And just to mention, we don't always have a bioswale. Like, for example, we just have regular landscape swales on the narrower roads. So we have more variety as to which tree species might do well. We just have those limitations where we're trying to accomplish for the district a full bioswale where possible, so that we get that other benefit, which is conveying and treating stormwater also.
Okay, the other question is from Krista Waddell, which is, what is the plan for Persimmon specifically? And will there be horse trails, and will there be a center turn lane?
Okay, so so the plan for Persimmon specifically involves, thus far, it's a recommendation, it involves designated Persimmon as an equestrian trail street. So an equestrian trail street would look kind of like this cross section. So we would think that you may want to consider going with, you have an 80-foot right of way on Persimmon, I believe. And so there's enough room to accommodate a shared use path, a full bioswale, fence both sides of it, and keep an unpaved equestrian trail on the outside edge. Pardon me. So in addition to this type of cross section that we would suggest, and by the way, this design can also handle a center turn lane where needed. We just skinny up the bioswale and the landscape swale and add a turn lane, and then return the road to its 2-lane configuration where that's appropriate. Pardon me. In addition, on Persimmon, we've identified a location for 6 different points along the corridor that might be appropriate for traffic calming. That would be a combination of raised intersections with splitter islands, at grade intersections with splitter islands, speed tables, as well as there are two canals on Persimmon. One is 1,500 feet roughly east of 140th. And the other is about 3,500 feet east of 140th. Those canals are not currently connected. So there's an opportunity to connect those canals with a culvert and install a speed table on top of the culvert when the road goes back together. That would enable you to have improved stormwater management, which of course is the priority of ITID. And at the same time, add a nice significant traffic calming measures in the form of speed tables that are pretty pronounced above culverts. So we're testing those combinations. I don't have more specificity than that just yet, but because we're still in the drafting phase. But those are the types of interventions that we're wanting to recommend to the district as we bring your plan forward. It would give you 6 different points of traffic calming along Persimmon in particular. And then in addition, as I mentioned earlier, we know that once Persimmon gets calmed, traffic will want to bleed out and cross through that section on the parallel roads. And so we're thinking that you'll want to have traffic calming on those parallel roads as well. And what I can do, I have a couple of additional slides, Betty, with your permission, that I'd like to kind of roll through. And then I'm happy to pull up a more detailed map to talk with residents about particular locations. Would that be all right?
Yeah, before we move on, I see that Tim Sayre has his hand. So Tim, can you wait, or do you want to have butt in at this
Oh, you
point?
can wait. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go wait.
All right. Go ahead, Tim.
I got like, I don't know, 6 more slides or so. That's about it. So, so picking up where we left off, we touched on bioswales, and of course, bioswales are going to be swales that can be landscaped, but also accomplish stormwater storage and conveyance. And so we're using bioswales as one of the measures. Fencing, as I mentioned, a split rail fencing is fairly low cost, very high impact when it comes to defining a corridor and really maintaining the look and feel of a rural and equestrian condition. So we strongly recommend the consideration of split rail fencing. And one of the things I wanted to touch on also is the idea of gated entries. And so earlier in the discussions with ITID, the idea of gating off a road like Persimmon is one that we were asked to evaluate. We don't tend to think that's an appropriate solution, but I didn't want to not include a slide so the public is aware that this type of improvement is one that's been identified and suggested. We've tried to better understand how a gated condition could work effectively, and we're at a point where we don't think it's a good mechanism to use, even though we feel fairly strongly that the interpretation that the ITID road network is the ITID's road network. We've reached out to the county, we've tried to understand how gating could be permitted, and we're concluding as a team that we don't think it's an appropriate solution. But again, I didn't want the community to not be aware. It's one of the ideas that we've tested because we know there's so much frustration about the impact of Westlake, particularly on Persimmon, but we just don't think it's a reasonable improvement, and it would have lots of challenges in its maintenance over time. But we have it addressed in the plan as a point of discussion. So what we find is gates tend to be damaged often. And when the gates are damaged, then it's a delay, it's a lag to get the gate restored. Pardon me. It's not a natural maintenance activity for ITID, so it's a special activity to take on as a district. When the gates are down, there's no throttling on drivers coming through. So what we see is just a continued point of jeopardy in gates not being maintained, being stuck open or being knocked down, which is what often happens with gates. And then we don't have the interventions, we don't have the resources to make the kinds of interventions that are more effective for speeding. The most effective interventions for speeding are where we have physical interventions in the roadway, chicanes, bulb outs, raised intersections, and the kinds of features that control not just the drivers that live on the road, because they're part of the speeding population as well as the cut-through population that's coming through. So as we've teased it out as professionals, what we would suggest is we don't think that's the best use of your resources to create the most manageable, maintainable, and attractive roadway network. But that's our suggestion to you. You as a board may decide that that's off base, but that's where we're leaning as a professional team. as we're working through the different components of the plan.
Well, I'd like to hear what the community's comments are. I mean, what they would like to see, because, you know, I just do not think that we should be ruling that out. I personally think it would be a lot cheaper to just put gates up and not have to change anything else, because now we don't have to deal with outside traffic cutting between us. But that's just my personal opinion. Tim, go ahead.
Okay, there we go. Couldn't get it to unmute. I just wanted to point out that the oak trees spread out to be anywhere from 80 to 100 feet wide. And they, so you would encompass from the base anywhere from 30 to 50 feet out from the base of the tree. And oak trees are poisonous to horses and all livestock. And they cause colic in horses and many other things. They cause other problems. So we'd have to be careful where we plant them, because if they overhang residents' property and they have horses, then there's an issue with that, because some horses have been known to become addicted to the acorns and leaves and blossoms and eat them until they virtually die from the trees.
Are you talking about live oak trees? Because I know that's the case for oak trees, like in Georgia, that's a problem, but I didn't know live oak trees were the same.
Well, I've heard the same. We'll have to check it out. I'm just bringing it up. Okay. It says all oak trees is what it says in all the literature I've read. And maple trees, we have to watch them red maple trees, the ACE or ACER, because the leaves on those are poisonous to horses also, but most others aren't. So I just wanted to point out that we need to do a little research on those. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, do we have any comments from anyone in the public? I'm interested, really would like to hear from the residents. Krista, do you want to talk instead of type, or you want me to read your message? I'm going to give you the mic. Hold on a sec. I don't, you're on here twice. I don't know which one's you. Krista, can you talk?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, my computer's not working correctly, so that's why I'm on
okay.
my phone. The question I was thinking is instead of the gates that they're recommending or had talked about on Persimmon, to block the canal that is east of 140th on Persimmon, just like the one at the Hamlin Horse Park is, to prevent the traffic from Westlake coming through.
Do you want to answer that, Kim? Because we actually did talk about doing that.
Sure. So Joe, I'm going to ask Joe just to comment. I think, did we become aware there's a water line along the canal, and that prevented the ability for interruptions in part of that right of way? I know, Joe, you're more familiar with that physical condition than I am. So I didn't know if you wanted to jump in on that.
I think the confusion is whether that canal crossing is sloping. In other words, the water from that's a high point in the canal versus a flow through area. In other words, and whether there needs to be a canal crossing there at all, I think so your thought about a water line meant the flow of water at that canal crossing. Does it need to cross Persimmon, for example, or is that a high point in the canal and it goes north and south? I think that's what we determined, that it may
Well,
be.
when I talked to Jay said the original design elevation had those canals connected. At some point it was modified for some reason.
Right. So I think we decided that we ultimately, I think, needed a canal crossing there, right? We needed a pipe there, or we don't need a pipe at all. We basically take the road out, I think, is what we've been looking into, is what we talked about in the last discussion, right?
Taking it out and connecting the canal. That's right.
Yes, yeah, that's what we talked about.
And that's here, right? Or on 140th.
Yeah, you don't have, if you're trying to show that map, it's not showing.
Oh, it's not showing? Sorry about that. I just pulled up a Google Earth map so that I could steer us around, and I will turn it back on. There we go. Share screen. There we go. So this is can everybody see that? This is an aerial of the Persimmon and the relationship to Westlake. You guys see that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, super. So Joe, can you steer me to that? So what we're talking about is this connection, right?
Yeah, go to the right of your hand. Keep going to the right. Keep going to the right. Almost there. Wait a minute. You went too far.
It's the first canal crossing.
Canal, right?
More
It's
to the
just-
west. No.
Keep going. You went.
It's right there.
Okay,
That
yeah,
one right there.
Yeah, up to the left a little bit, just a little
Yeah.
bit. To the left. Keep going. Just a little bit more to the left.
That's the
That's
right.
the
I'm sorry,
The
west.
other left? The
Yeah,
other left is the one you want? Fine. I can do that.
go to the west. Go to the
Hey.
west.
Kim, it's the first canal that runs parallel with 140th,
It's
which
this
is
guy right
to the
here.
east of 140th. Right
Almost.
here.
There you go.
Right there. Right there.
I was in the right spot. Okay.
You
Got
got it.
it. So that's our canal, right?
Yeah.
This is 1,500 feet east of 140th.
Yes, and my understanding from discussions with Jay is that the original design elevation had, or drainage design had that canal connected. And at some point when they did the paving or what have you, they took that culvert out or they just put the road in and disconnected it. I don't know. But the original design elevation had it connected.
So one of the options that we've been talking about is possibly taking that canal crossing out, correct? Taking the road out of that area and so the only, the
Correct.
items to think about with that, correct, would be, first of all, that would kind of limit people that would come from the west going east, okay, and getting to pretty much Avocado, okay, or all the way to Royal Palm Beach Boulevard, right? So that would still be a hindrance for some of the people in the district. So just so we're clear, from 140th to that point, we still have a hindrance of those people because now they're not going to be able to cross the canal either. So, and I'm just pointing out things that we should be thinking about. So on 50th Street, the people that lived west of that canal would have to go to 140th, and they'd either go north and they can go up to Sunset, or they can go south to 44th and go if they have to go, if they're going east, right? So that in my mind is something to think about, what are some of our own residents going to be hindered by that. That doesn't mean you don't do it, but the point is that is an option, is to take that canal crossing it and provide a canal crossing there. Now, the thing that we all have to remember is what Kim pointed out also. If we traffic calm Persimmon, you're probably going to push people onto 44th, Orange Grove Boulevard, down below, just below your hand, or they're going to, down below. You can see the 140th goes right there. It goes across the canal, and then it's got a little dog leg to the north, and then goes west that way. So you ultimately could push more people to that road. So you'd probably want to traffic calm that road also in some way or another. The second thing is to the north, there's Sunset Trail there also. And obviously you're going to push more people to that road. And that does have some traffic coming, I believe, already on it. But we would have to probably think about the traffic coming to that. So I'm only pointing out the issues that you're going to have. And I think our concern is what traffic's coming into the district as a shortcut. And so, obviously removing the canal crossing is one option. Putting in more speed tables in that area, maybe, or speed tables or different types of speed control items may be better. You know, we've talked about various controls. We've talked about chicanes. We've talked about raised intersections, like maybe Avocado becomes a raised intersection where you make it so it's not as an easy drive as many people would think, and they may not want to use that road. So, I mean, I don't want to say either one of those options is not available. I'm just trying to tell you the items that I would think about when we start removing access for our own residents. What are their complaints going to be? So, so anyway, that's all I can say about that. I don't know if there's anything else, Kim, you want me to address on that?
No, that addressed it well. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, I have a question here from Mark Young. Mark, do you want to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm actually off of Persimmon, kind of roughly where that red dot is. I actually am not that fond of, I don't understand why you want to close off that road, because I mean, that's going to force more traffic on Persimmon. Once Minto opens up their entrance, which will be on Persimmon, there's going to be a lot more traffic. So I'm not sure why you want to force more traffic on there. As a
No,
resident,
what we were talking about was closing off that canal so that it would prevent traffic on Persimmon.
Right.
okay, if it was the canal I saw, I didn't see how it affected that many homes. Could you zoom back in onto that canal you're talking about?
Well, it affects all the residents that travel and use Persimmon now. So that's essentially the answer, is that Persimmon is the sacrificial lamb.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, currently traffic is not that bad on Persimmon where I'm located. It's obviously a little bit worse as you get closer to State Road 7. And of course, the
So-
barriers of time of day too.
Mark, do you know what's coming? I mean, we got a traffic, and this is the one thing we have not talked about, Kim, and I need to say it. Can you please scroll out and show Minto, Westlake?
I know Minto's got like 5,000 homes.
We have a traffic tsunami coming, okay? And that's the best way to describe it. There's going to be 6,500 homes built there, 2.1 million square feet of commercial, non-residential, industrial, you name it. It is going in there. And they want to put that traffic on Persimmon.
Yeah.
So that's why I am very, my feeling is I don't know why we can't just gate off that whole area to the east and be done with it. And to me, I think that's the cheapest way to deal with that whole area. But the one thing is that the county doesn't like it and Westlake doesn't like it, but do our residents like it? I mean, they're the one, this is their community. And I just think personally, over time, it's a lot cheaper to maintain gates than it is doing all this traffic calming to deal with all these traffic tsunami that's coming through us. So I'm not understanding that explanation. And I love Kim and I love Joe. You guys have worked really hard, but my personal opinion is that, it's not our job to accommodate the traffic in Westlake. And I feel very strongly about this. And, I'm not concerned about the county's concerns or Westlake's concerns. There are roads, they don't have easements to them. And, if the answer is that the county's not going to let us do it, then I think they need to give us a pretty good explanation why they're not going to help protect the residents in this area. But that's just my personal opinion. I think that we could gate off a certain section of this and make it work very well. And
well, now that I understand the purpose of the gate, where would the gate be located? Like on Persimmon Boulevard near the end?
I would put it on any of the entrances, any of the roads that cut through our community in that east section, so that whole area is essentially a gated community. The only place that we couldn't do it is a small cutout off of 60th, which is the Unit 14. Do you have that map, Kim?
Yeah.
I am interested to hear what the residents that live there, what they really think about that idea. So unit 14 is essentially where you've got that cross where the railroad or the FPL, isn't that the FPL easement, Kim? We can just look at it right here.
Right here.
So it's that parcel of land, that square that has that diagonal FPL easement in it. That is the one unit. We cannot close that off because that unit of development was developed differently than the other ones. And so those roads are actually dedicated to the public. So we could close off all the other roads, but we couldn't close off that specific unit.
I mean, obviously the biggest, I think, thing that would help is the completion of State Road 7 to help connect to North Lake as far as getting rid of traffic.
So we're trying to focus on the things that we have control
Oh
on.
yeah,
And,
no, I
and
realize that.
State Road 7 is not going to change what's
Yeah.
going to happen here. In fact, the completion of State Road 7 is going to invite more traffic, onto Persimmon. It's the issue is going
There's a
to
tsunami
be
coming.
there's a tsunami coming, right? And right now, everybody's thinking about the existing circumstances. And I've been working on this, since Minto put in their application. And the one thing that we've been trying to get people to understand is that there is a tsunami coming and it is going to impact that whole eastern corridor. But most importantly, it's going to impact the people that live along Persimmon, 140th and 60th. There will be cut through traffic on those other things, but if you cut off, if you put gates and it's only residents that live in that area can get into that whole quadrant through those gates, then you solve that problem. You can make it smaller. You can do it unit by unit. I mean, there's several different ways I think we can do this. And maybe staff doesn't like it. Again, I'm not trying to be derogatory to anyone, but oftentimes when something is unfamiliar to people, they don't want to take it on. Our particular staff, they don't have to maintain staff, but there's lots of special districts that manage HOAs that have contracts to maintain gates because they have gates. They're gated subdivisions. Northern Improvement District is one of them. So that's the least of my concerns. My concern is really what is the best way that we can protect the residents in this eastern quadrant so that your quality of life is not impacted. That is my goal. That has always been my goal. And if the residents say, hey, Betty, we don't like the idea of gating it off, then fine, I'll stop talking about it. But, that's not, if we're not even going to explore it as an option and talk about it, then, I'm not convinced. So.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. You're exploring, but I do see that as being sort of a temporary option. I mean, either way, the traffic's going to be there. It would make sense in my own thought process. And again, this is just me
thinking. It's going to
thinking.
be where? If you have a gate, they cannot get in there, right? So what do you mean it's going to be there?
Well,
where?
If you have 6,500 homes, the traffic's going to go somewhere.
Right.
On Seminole Pratt or somewhere. So.
Right.
In my mind, that you have to improve the roads to be able to accommodate and provide alternate routes. And so in my mind, I mean, one of the challenges I've seen before is Orange Grove, it jogs over when it connects it through, but increasing capacity on these alternate roads, like 40th, it used to be, I guess it's paved now, looking at Google Maps. I think it was a dirt road before, but increasing capacity on the alternate routes would seem to be another option that.
But why, can I ask a question? Do you think, so here's an important point, Mark. Our district residents, we pay tax assessments to maintain our roads, drainage, and parks, okay? We pay for that. We've always paid for that. We do not receive any kind of sales tax revenue, gas tax revenue like municipalities in the county get. We don't get impact fees. We don't get any of those things. Our roads are built and maintained on behalf and for our residents, our taxpayers. So why should our roads that are Indian Trail roads be used to facilitate other people's traffic, counties, Mintos, Avenires. Why should our roads be used?
Because they're going to be used anyway.
No, but
Because the traffic's going to go somewhere. I mean,
but that shouldn't it be the county's problem to deal with? Shouldn't it be the county that has to deal with it on 60th, which is a county road, Seminole Pratt, which is a county road, North Lake, which is a county road, not on our residential roads destroying because what's going to happen as soon as they have access to that, you're going to have no quality of life. Okay. I mean, quite frankly, I wouldn't want to live there at all. It's really a sad thing to say, but if we're not going to do something to protect that area, you're going to have 6,500 homes plus the commercial and everything else, all of that traffic from State Road 7 trying to find any way that it can to get there. Okay. And by the way, the county just signed an agreement with Westlake or Minto to purchase for the property appraiser's office. And apparently they're relocating the property appraiser's office from Royal Palm Beach into Westlake. So now, in addition to everything else, okay, you're going to have the traffic from Royal Palm Beach that used to go to that property appraiser's office. Now they got to go to Westlake to get it done. And how do you think they're going to go there?
local roads. Yeah.
They're going to use our roads. And that's why I'm saying these are our roads. Are we willing to take a stand and say to the county, this is what we want to do to protect our roads? And if our residents are willing to say that, and we as a board are willing to say that, shouldn't we be doing that? Because not for nothing, the alternative is turning all of our roads into 4-lane, 6-lane roads to accommodate a city that's been built that we opposed in the first place. So.
Okay, I mean, I see what you're saying. I mean, the traffic calming features that you're mentioning, like the canopies and things like that, I mean, they don't seem to solve the underlying problem, which obviously is a whole bunch of new inflow from Minto.
So
well, I don't have any good solutions.
Right.
So let's talk about maybe we should talk about how the gate works, Betty, just so we're all on the same page.
Let's do that.
Because I think I believe what you're asking for. First of all, yes, Persimmon Boulevard in the area that we've showed the pin there, it's got to be, I believe, east of 140th, because 140th does have some rights on that of maybe the Westlake, which still has to be researched. But the fact of the matter, we're talking about something that would be east of 140th. It basically would be a gate that residents in the district would have the right to open and close. Right? I mean, basically that in emergency vehicles would have the right to open and close. So your people from ITID can go into Westlake. It's the majority of the traveling public that would come out of Westlake would be restricted by the gate, and they would come to 140th, and they would say, well, I can't get through that gate. I'm going to go north or I'm going to go south. And it depends on which their destination is. They're going to Royal Palm Beach Boulevard, they'd go south. Possibly they would come to what is the second possible gate to the south, which I believe that is 44th, right? And that's probably the only road that then, although it jogs a little bit, it does cross the canal. So then the question is how do we restrict? That's an indirect route for those people now, right? So they may not all follow that route, but many of them are going to keep going. They're going to come to the second gate, and where the second gate is. So you're going to have to do a second gate or some significant amount of traffic calming, which you're trying to avoid, I believe, is what you're pointing out. Let's avoid the traffic calming. Let's do the gates. So you've already established now that you need at least 2 gates. It is only open and closed by your residents and emergency personnel, correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, and county services, SWA.
Okay, county services.
USPS, whatever.
Yeah, all those people. Maybe, I don't know if you have to decide who you're going to allow and who not to use.
Right.
I think you're going to get into the public-private road situation here, but that's not my that's not mine to discuss. Mine is just to say, how would it work? We're gonna have to get a way for people, your people to be able to open and close that gate, and the other people, you're gonna try to restrict from having options to do that. So now we talked about the person, we talked about the people that are gonna come from Westlake to 140th and they're gonna go south. Let's talk about the people that are gonna go north. And then there's a gate that Kim has pointed out, a possible gate, and that's at Sunset Trail.
Mhm.
The only issue I see with that, it could be the same type of gate, but that road there, Sunset, as well as 140th up to the school and 60th, that was paid for. There's a school board you're going to have to deal with on that, and I'm not sure they're going to let you do that because they paid for it. But it is your road, right? Sunset is your.
That one, we already discussed that one's not going to be a possibility.
So you're not going to be able to put a gate there, but you can do other traffic calming, correct? Or the
Yes.
person can go all the way up to 60th. The new 60th is going to be a 5-lane section, and they may not have any reason to go down Sunset anyway. So again, you're talking at least 2 gates, right?
Right.
I mean, maintenance is an issue. The rights to do that. Obviously the gates will allow your people to go into Westlake, which is what you're not trying to avoid that, and they'd probably be happy to have your residents use their services. So.
Well, that's why they're designing everything the way they are. So.
Right.
So the pin that you've got, Kim, that is on 60th, the second one to the east, that's unit 14. We wouldn't be able to put there. It would have to go basically where you've got the orange or the red pin for persimmon.
Yep, I see it down here.
Yeah, it would have to go down. It would have to probably be somewhere around there.
A gate or other traffic calming feature.
Something, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Once we have the gates and you need any other feature, that's what I'm, of the concern you have on pass-through or cut-through traffic, right? Once you have those 2 gates, but I think your point is, Betty, you don't need anything else.
You can do other things that essentially prohibit the cut-through traffic from the other directions. You could put a gate that prohibits someone from trying to come from 60th to cut through as well. So, where you don't put it right at 60th, you put it at 60th or at Persimmon and 130th there, or, somewhere where they're not going to be cutting through from the north to come to the south, right?
Right. I get it. You're doing the traffic that's going back at night during,
Yeah, I'm thinking of all things that basically that square that has, that FPL pull through. Excuse me, if I remember correctly, that's unit 14. We cannot do anything with that, but the parcel to the south we can. So I'm just suggesting that there is a way for us to do this that, doesn't have to have all these other things. So just to move on, I've got Mark. Sorry, Kim.
Yep, to clarify, so am I locating the gates in the sections that you think are the right ones?
Well, except for the one that is on
Right.
140th at Sunset, that one cannot be there.
This one is no gate?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we would have to figure out where to the east, like you've got that green one there, we'd have to figure that out.
So I'm thinking what we had been exploring is a series of different traffic calming interventions on Persimmon to slow it down, make it an equestrian street, bioswale, narrow the dimension. And PS, by the way, the county, the county does have the ability to acquire roadways sometimes. And so
Right. Let them try.
So we're thinking by designing a roadway section that puts some fixed infrastructure in place, that it becomes a less attractive roadway to acquire. So by making Persimmon an improved roadway for residents to be able to use, and then calming, as Joe was mentioning, Sunset to the north and 44th to the south, and making it easier for that traffic to go 140th to 60th and get out again. Make it easy to travel on the roadways that can be designed to accommodate faster speeds and higher volumes, and make it very uncomfortable to traverse the district, in the center. So, but gates are an alternative. So we just, again, we've been working through this as a team. We hadn't landed on them as a recommendation, but it's great that we're having this conversation tonight. It's very helpful.
Okay, so I have a couple of hands up and comments, so I'm going to finish the comments because Mark, I'm not sure that we actually read what you had said earlier. You had typed under the Q&A, I like the large speed bumps that we have on Orange. I worry about fallen branches on roads for canopies that cover the road from frequent windstorms. And then we have Dixie, not a question, but would like to see an equestrian traffic circle on Seminole Pratt and Okeechobee Boulevard. That's a good point. I do think that Loxahatchee Groves is going to be doing an equestrian trail along Okeechobee Boulevard. And so that's something that, we may want to connect up at some point. Dixie says, let traffic use Seminole Pratt that's built for that type of traffic. Our 2-lane roads can't hold up to that type of traffic, and don't want our money going to fix Persimmon all the time. Good point. Denise Beaton, not a question, just a comment. Traffic works both ways. I live near Persimmon, east of Royal Palm Beach. I want to be able to get out west quicker. I want access to the high school, the shops, restaurants, and medical facilities. And Denise Beaton, would every acreage resident get a code to open the gates? That could potentially be the consideration for doing it. And then that argument of it's impacting other residents would actually be addressed. Okay, and we've got Krista Waddell. Do you want to speak? Go ahead, Krista.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
So just my thoughts, if you traffic calm Persimmon, and then that will push everything north and south.
Mm-hmm.
So then you'll have to traffic calm Orange Grove and 44th where it crosses over. So then you're spending money on 2 roads. If, I don't know how many people on the board are considering that idea of blocking off Persimmon by digging that canal out or putting blockades up like there is on Hamlin by the horse park. But that would prevent any of that extra stuff that you would do to Persimmon, and you would only have to traffic calm Orange Grove and 44th.
So I'm gonna let Joe speak to that, because actually it does the same thing that we were talking about, Krista, because when you traffic calm or you prevent somebody from going, then they do have to go somewhere else, right? So even though we do that and it's only an inconvenience potentially for, well, it's an inconvenience for the people that live there to the west of it. They now have to go onto another road in order to go east, but the people that typically would be going west, like say to go to the school, they'd also have to go to another road. So it's kind of the same thing that when you look at all those other roads there, they've been blocked. Persimmon and Orange Grove are the only 2 that go through besides 40th and 60th, I think. Is that correct?
40,
Sunset.
I think 40th is blocked now, right?
No, it's blocked at, yeah, but you can take 40th to go to, is it Avocado or 130th or?
Right.
Yeah,
you can still go pretty far on 40th.
Right. Yep.
So, somebody cuts through to 40th, at some point that traffic becomes a problem somewhere else in the district, right?
Yeah, that's the nature of it. So it's kind of like, it's almost like the waterbed theory of planning. This is what I think about with traffic calming, because if you push the bed down in one spot, it always rises somewhere else. So that's traffic calming is almost whack-a-mole. I try to find the analogies that make sense. So, and what are we only have so many known variables, right? So the known variables are traffic coming from external sources, wanting to get to this destination, and traffic rising from this location, wanting to get to other destinations. So we know those two things are fixed. Those are factors that that we cannot control for. So what we can control for is how we mitigate those impacts in the neighborhood so that we maintain access for our own residents, as well as prevent the cut through to the best of our ability from external, right? That's the tension. So again, as we, we don't tend to recommend disconnecting a roadway network. This is an unusual condition that we don't have lots of comparables to, but we address the issue of cut through traffic and speeding in every community that we work with on every project. Every community has that as at least one of the things they're dealing with. So disconnecting the roadway network really tends to shift the problem to make it somebody else's problem. And then it shifts and shifts and shifts to the point where it can consume a roadway, or if we have a roadway that ultimately gets widened, like a 60th Street, for example, which is one of the things we're talking about, you can make it so uncomfortable to travel in the internal roadway network that you push that traffic, the majority of that traffic, to the perimeter. And that's one of the strategies I think that you're trying to advance with this, with the approach. Joe, one of the questions I had, since you're on the call, just so that I understand it, as I was kind of thinking about the installation of the gates on the network, is there a requirement for the roadway to then accommodate an area so cars that don't go through can turn around? Like, what if you're the pizza delivery guy and you can't get in? You have to turn around in the road. Do we have to adjust the design of the road around the gate to add that kind of turnaround area? And do we have the room to do that? Or is that not even necessary?
You could do a U-turn.
Yeah, you got it. Well, it's the same analogy as if a school bus, for example, comes to that gate and they don't have the ability to open it for whatever reason, or whatever, you have to provide accommodation. I'm assuming we're going to provide the accommodation like we do in any private development that has a gate in it, where people can turn around and get out of that area.
Right.
We have an 80-foot right of way. We have to look at, I'm sure, we have to be something, an adjustment we'd have to make. And we haven't come up with that design yet, but we would have to make it so that you can get back out onto 140th, of course, or go back on Persimmon in Westlake if you come to that point. So yes, you have to accommodate that.
So we'd have to put down the radius of like a truck making a turn to get back out again? I'm guessing whatever the vehicle is that we have to accommodate to make the turnaround to get back out.
Yeah, we could put a nice roundabout right there and then have a gate on one side of it.
Okay, got it.
I mean, I really don't have anything more to add, Betty, on relative to, we already have experience with these traffic calming on various roads in the district. If you go to the north of Orange, as you know, ones that have traffic calming, obviously people have gone to the roads that are next to it. There's more accidents on those roads. So what are we doing now? We're adding more traffic calming. So,
right. And the thing is that it's a never ending problem. And so then the traffic calming, it isn't working. You got it on every single road and you still have speeding and you have more traffic and now you got more accidents and the traffic is still coming. So that's not really going to solve the problem. And, I know you guys have all heard me say this before, and I'm going to say it for the benefit of our guests that are here. And I said this at the TPA meeting, okay? No one would consider putting a major thoroughfare road through any of the HOAs that exist in this county. And yet what we're talking about doing for our community in several different instances with respect to State Road 7, with respect to Westlake's traffic, with respect to Avenir's traffic, and even if GL Homes develops. Our community is having to put major thoroughfare roads through our residential areas to accommodate this. And it would never be considered in any of these HOA areas. So I think we should be looking at treating it our area, and not that we want to be HOAs, because I think if you ask any one of our residents, they'll tell you hell to the no, right? We don't want to be an HOA, but for the perspective of protecting our area and limiting our area, you know, this is an option that potentially does that. Then we don't have to deal with that traffic coming through. Then we don't have to worry about spending all this money on traffic calming and still having the traffic. The traffic is still going to go through there. We want to prohibit it. We want to discourage it, but eventually once they're built out, it's still going to come. And that's my concern. And I want to be completely and utterly honest with everyone. That's what I'm thinking about. And I think that everybody really needs to be thinking about the 6,500 cars, according to the counties, that's just residents, according to the county's calculation at 10 trips a day, that's 65,000 cars a day. Okay, that's just for houses. That doesn't include the commercial. That doesn't include, you know, Miss Beaton had mentioned that she would like to go west to the shopping, right? Everybody wants to use the conveniences of Westlake, and that's great, but what roads is all that traffic going to be using? It's going to be using your roads in addition to. So now you got an extra trip from Miss Beaton on your road. No offense, Miss Beaton, but that's what happens, okay? And is that really, you know, our responsibility to accommodate all of that traffic on our roads? Is there a way for us to do it that we're only dealing with our own residents? Is there a way for us to do it so that this isn't going to be another, you know, 10 years down the road, we got to look at another option because it's not working. I'm looking for a long-term solution, and I'm not sure whether, you know, what the different issues are. Is it because we're not a municipality that, you know, we got to rely on what the county says, you know, they can and can't do, or, you know, is that something for us to be considering? I don't know, but I think that we need to be honest that we have a traffic tsunami coming and we need to deal with it, and because nobody else is looking out for us, nobody else cares. So we have a question. Yeah.
So let's just stick with the gate issue again. I just want to look at this one for first time. We put the gate here, we make the accommodations as Kim talked about on turnarounds. And then if you go north or south of this, you're going to have the next paved road. And there's things that you can do and maybe make them dead ends where they don't tie to 140th. Maybe you put an extreme amount of traffic coming on them initially coming off of 140th. So it is annoying for the people to drive down those roads. Remembering you're going to have your own people that are going to have to drive down those roads themselves. Or you just basically make dead ends out of them where they don't tie to 140th. And then there's issues of circulation of traffic. So I mean, there are options that we have.
We don't have, yeah.
I'm not sure that all of the, I mean, we can present several different options and then you can make a decision with your board and with the residents. But I mean, I think the idea is possibly the gates that we talked about, these two here. What we do on the other side, we have to talk about, but at least we can avoid people cutting through directly from there, and we divert the traffic. We divert to 60th, which we know we've kind of made that the sacrificial lamb. There are
because it is a county road and it is only one side of the road.
Right.
Yeah. Not that, I mean, I feel bad for the 60th residents. They've got it coming every which way. Okay. But it is a county road. It is a county right of way. And these other roads are not. So
right. That's a distinction. You're
yeah.
Right.
Since Joe raised
and 140th is not a county road either. So
right. So if we're going to divert traffic out, I just want to understand so I can be sure that I'm crafting an appropriate plan. I think what I'm hearing is a desire to facilitate the movement of traffic from these guys, really north-south on 140th and then east-west on 60th. That's really our flow, right? Joe, what I'm hearing is to treat that, and one of the issues is when cars got to turn around if they can't get in. So maybe we get roundabouts where the gates are. It's going to take a little bit of property, but that way cars can get in and out again. And that eastern edge of the roundabout then becomes where the gate is, and we allow people, if they come in, they can't get through, then they turn back out. That we can also, vehicles can make the turn. We have to be able to accommodate commercial vehicles turning around.
I don't know. I don't think we need to talk about that right now, but we can talk. I mean, I don't see any other HOA having that anyway. I don't think we need to talk about that right now. We do have some other comments, and it's already 8:15, so I just want to get to these other comments. Mark Young is saying, is there a way to inform Google Maps and the iPhone's navigation software of the existence of these gates so that these apps keep traffic away? I believe so. Do you know that, Kim?
I'm not familiar with that. That's a question that's been raised before. I'll try to find out if there's a way you can let Google Maps know.
Okay. And then Denise Beaton. Denise says, I've always gone that way to access the elementary and middle schools. We have a right to drive on our roads. Yes, nobody's stopping you, Denise, from driving on the road. We're not talking about that. What I said was that when you have all these other elements, which we do not have now that is attracting traffic, just like I mentioned that when they relocate the property appraiser's office, that's not that they're going to put that in Westlake, that's now going to attract all that traffic that went to the Royal Palm Beach property appraiser's office, now going to go through our community to go to the one in Westlake. So that's additional trips that you normally wouldn't have taken to go eat in Westlake is now additional trips on our roads that we don't currently have. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that you shouldn't and that you don't have the right to drive on the roads. You absolutely do. But we also should be talking about how we limit it to our residents. That's all I'm saying. What if Royal Palm Beach or Loxahatchee decided they don't want any traffic? Should areas start putting gates up everywhere? Well, they're municipalities and they collect gas taxes for their roads. We don't. So any other questions? And put your hands up. Joni, you got something to say?
Yeah, hi. I think it's a good idea to absolutely, look at the possibilities of gates before just completely writing it off. I definitely understand both sides of it. And I do understand Betty's point and why she, thinks that might be the easiest, best route forward. So that we don't have to be changing traffic calming and changing all of this other stuff. I definitely think it's something that should be explored. I also really, really like the ideas of putting in the culvert and the thoroughfare over the canal being taken away. So that closes that off. That's another option. I definitely think we need some more input from our community because I definitely think there's two sides to it. Some people are going to want to go straight across. Some people are absolutely adamantly against it. So I don't know.
Joni, just as a reminder, we did send a mail piece to each one of the residents that live in that whole section. So.
Right. And they tend to not respond until the tractors are at their front door.
Exactly.
Which is what we're trying to get people to realize, that this is coming their way. I don't know if something, more strongly urging them of how urgent this is, that we need everybody to weigh in what they really would like, how they feel about things. Because yeah, I think we need to let people know that we're going to have quite a battle and a lot of work ahead of us. And we definitely want to be doing what the community wants. If everybody understands how the gates would protect the community and that might be the best thing, then they can vote on it. If people are offended by gates, gates, have a bad connotation to some people, they absolutely don't want it. It definitely needs to be worked on. And I definitely think there's got to be more input. So I don't know if we can be sending a survey or something where they have to return it to us if people aren't going to participate on the meetings. I don't know, but I definitely think we have a lot more exploring to do in order to keep this quadrant where we would like it, which is not to have Westlake's traffic going through. I mean, the main point is not to allow that to happen.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's where I'm at.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. I don't see anything, so I'll turn it back over to you, Kim.
So, okay, so we have a lot of good feedback on the gate and additional measures of protection for the neighborhood. So we will work out some cost estimates to better understand the gate, the turnaround, how many fobs and the maintenance and that type of thing. So we have a holistic estimate for what that type of improvement would cost. And then we'll look to you for additional feedback on if gates are perhaps going to become a measure. Are there other locations that we should consider? Because it's a little trickier, I think, to locate gates with the operational challenges associated with them versus other measures. So we'll continue to explore the traffic calming interventions that make sense in this particular location. I think we have had good feedback for all the other locations in the district. We have a pretty extensive set of improvements that will be presented to the board over the next couple of weeks and the community. And so I'll just put up a slide that has my contact info, so everybody has that. If there's any additional information that you'd like to receive from us or or information you'd like to share. So this slide has my contact info, both my work cell phone as well as the office. And these days we're not spending much time in the office. The cell phone number is always best for me. That's the second one, the 708-8471 number, or by email. Any comments or questions that you might have, please feel free to send them my way or send them to the district so they can be part of the public record. And then with that, we will be providing an update to the board at its meeting next week. And so we'll summarize the feedback, the high points from tonight's discussion as part of that. And then over the next month or so, have a plan document for the board and the community to begin to review with a large-scale public workshop. We would anticipate at this point now, with additional options to test. I think that workshop will probably be in July sometime, with a chance to present a whole series of improvements, different options, their costs, and a recommended implementation time frame for things that you might want to consider maybe over the near term, maybe within a 5-year time frame, the midterm, maybe a 6 to 10 year time frame, and then longer term. And also package those up in a manner that would make you the most competitive that we can for bringing in dollars from other entities, like from the TPA for traffic calming and those types of things. So that'll we'll be presenting a status update to the board at your meeting again June of next week, and then I think we'll be looking to a workshop in likely the month of July. So keep tuned to this channel because there'll be plenty of documentation to review as we go. Everything that we produce as an agency and a team, of course, is always in pencil. We take our best effort at trying to summarize what we think we've heard and what we think are the best solutions, but everything's always in pencil. And actually, it's still in pencil even after the board adopts it. There's always opportunity to continue to refine any planning effort. And so we're happy to get that feedback. It makes our work better and more effective. So please don't be shy in communicating anything else that you might think of as you're thinking about improved mobility for the district. So with that, I'll certainly forward this presentation to ITID. So ITID will have it on the website, and it'll be in a PDF format, so anybody can download it and kind of work through it and ask any questions or look for follow-up information. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you tonight.
Hey, Kim, I just want to make sure we had a question from Kim. What is the time frame on this? I think you just answered that. Is that so, Kim? Is your question answered?
A different Kim.
It's a different Kim. Yeah. She asked, what is the time frame on this? Okay. She said yes. Okay. Perfect. And before we sign off, Dan, did we have any Facebook Live as well?
There are quite a bit of questions on there. There's a whole bunch. Yeah.
Oh.
There's like 30 or 40. I mean,
Oh.
it'd probably be best for you guys, probably Kim and the board, to review and comment on those in the days coming.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Thank you so much, Kim.
You're welcome, guys.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.